भक्तानुकम्पाधृतविग्रहं वै ईशावतारं परमेशमित्यं तं रामकृष्णं शिरसा नमामि. Friends, I have been asked to speak in English, so excuse me for speaking in a tongue that is neither natural to me nor to you. But unfortunately, I am not able to speak in the language that is spoken here, which is a deficiency which I cannot overcome, for which I beg your pardon. The subject for this evening is Yugadharma Sthapak Swami Shri Ramakrishna. That is, Shri Ramakrishna as the establisher of the ideal, spiritual ideal for the age. I translate in this manner because the word dharma has been used in various senses. So Yuga Dharma also may be very differently interpreted by different people. Shri Ramakrishna did not bother much about the various interpretations. To go to the root, Shri Ramakrishna said, I know nothing except God. Verily I tell you, I do not know anything except God. That is his utterance, emphatic utterance. Shatyi bolchi ami ishwar boi ar kichu jani na. He said with repeated emphasis. He was not even conscious that he was going to be a teacher of the age or for anybody at all. Once I put the subject like this, a teacher who never taught. Sri Ramakrishna never had the ego, thinking that he is the teacher. He used to say, 3 words prick me. The word teacher. He used these forms, Katta, Baba, Guru, as the preceptor, as the Karta or agent, or Baba, father, spiritual or inner lessons. These 3 terms he never accepted. And yet we speak about him as the establisher of the religion for the age. It seems to be rather curious, but the whole life of Sri Ramakrishna is curious. As I told you from the very beginning, if we study his life, he never posed as a teacher. On the other hand, he said, I am an eternal learner. As long as I live, I learn. That was his words. And then just think of the humility with which he used to behave with others. When somebody spoke about him in some high-sounding words, he would say, I am the humblest of the humble. I am not even worthy enough to be just a hair of your body, like that, he said. Now these are the expressions that we hear from him. Sometimes people think that to set him up as the ideal for the age or as the world teacher who has come to deliver a unique message that seems to be rather in contrast with what he professed and what he practiced in his life. Apparently it is so. But at the same time, if we study his life from the beginning to the end, we find this wonderful contrast in his life everywhere. Take for instance, from the very beginning, when he was just a little child, he was spontaneously gifted with God realization of a very high order. We do not know where from he got this knowledge, this realization, not with any kind of sadhana as we understand by the word. Shri Ramakrishna gave some hint about it, but never elaborated the point. He said, incarnations of God are born with their full realization. They make their compare them with the kind of plants which flower later, fruits come first. Aage phal tarpare phool. First fruit, then flower. See the life of Shri Ramakrishna that way. When he was just a little child, he had God realization, God vision of the highest order. That cannot be said to have been brought about by any kind of sadhana, any practice. It came spontaneously. So we say it was inborn in him. So that is flower later, but fruits first. That was the peculiarity with which Sri Ramakrishna is endowed from the very beginning, just from his boyhood. But then that was not the end of it. His sadhana, regular practice, began a little later. At first he had that spontaneous urge for God realization. That also is somewhat in contrast with his experience of the highest order even before his teenage. Now how it can be compatible with, consistent with our reasoning, we do not know. But this is a fact that has to be reckoned with from the stories that we hear about him, which have been authenticated by various persons. Now that is the peculiar life that we have before us. Now this Sri Ramakrishna therefore has to be understood with, say, two different stages of understanding, two different angles of understanding. One angle tells us that he is the perfect representation of the highest reality. And on the other hand, he is just an ordinary person like us who practices his sadhana and realizes the supreme reality. Now these are the two aspects that we have before us. These two go side by side. We do not see only in Sri Ramakrishna but in other great prophets and incarnations also. Every incarnation is supposed to be born with the spiritual knowledge. But then that knowledge had to be manifested, at least for sake of others, had to be manifested by some prescribed methods. And Sri Ramakrishna literally practiced that, as for instance, even in the life of other incarnations we know. Even Sri Krishna went to the Guru Griha to learn scriptures and practice things. Sri Ramachandra did the same thing. Every teacher, every incarnation has to do that. Why do they do like this? Because they have to just show to the world by demonstrating in their life how the reality has to be attained step by step right up to the last stage. That has to be demonstrated by their life. Without this demonstration, the purpose of their incarnation becomes defeated. If they remain in their highest stage, then, well, God is there, Brahman is there eternally, but that does not help us. We have to just be helped by a person who comes down to our level and then shows us the way to go up step by step to the highest goal. That is why everything has to be just accepted by the incarnations, by the great prophets, so that stage by step they can lead mankind from wherever they are to the highest goal. Swami Sharadananda Maharaj has mentioned in his life of Sri Ramakrishna, that is Sri Ramakrishna Lila Prasanga, which is translated into the Sri Ramakrishna the Great Master in English. There he said that every event in the life of Sri Ramakrishna has got a deep meaning for us. It was not simply a life that is lived in isolation, but it was a life that was to be a beacon light for us, so that we can have our path lighted and gradually we can reach the highest goal, as has been shown by Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda has mentioned, even the Vedas and the Vedantas will have to be understood in the light of Sri Ramakrishna. In the light of his teachings, his life will be the light by means of which we have to read the meaning of the scriptures. The scriptures contain every bit of wisdom perhaps, but they remain unintelligible to us unless we see them interpreted through the lives of these incarnations. They make the scriptures living. Otherwise they become simply books which will have no meaning to us. Or as Sri Ramakrishna himself has stated, our scriptures everywhere are a mixture of sand and sugar. The sand and the sugar are mixed up together. You have to find out where the sand is and where the sugar. Reject the sand and take the sugar. Because the truths will have to be coated with some coverings, then only they can be conveyed to others. To be conveyed, the truth requires some husk, as it were, something to protect it from being diluted or being unintelligible to the people. Brahman has been so much described, so elaborately described by scriptures. Do we really understand him? Suppose we study the scriptures, where do we end? We end in either agnosticism or in a sort of bewilderment. We do not know where we are landed. That is why in the scriptures again it is said, Nanudhyayad bahun chavdan vacho viglapanang hitat. Do not read too much of scriptures, that will make your ideas clouded. Your ideas will be clouded unless you have some sure guide who can tell you how to go through them. That is why every knowledge has to be received through an enlightened soul. A light has to be kindled with another light. An enlightened soul alone can enlighten others. Otherwise the scriptures remain simply sealed books. You do not know how to open the seal and know the contents. That is what happens in the case of scriptures for all religions, not only here, everywhere else. We are trying to understand them. But how? How are we to understand? The key is held by these supernatural lives. It is they who have the key. Unless you just take the help of the key, we cannot open the portals of the truth. It is not possible for us to realize them without being guided by others. That is why the great logician and great enlightener of the world, Bhagavan Shankaracharya, he says, Sampradaya vihina sarva shastra vidapi na vishwasaniya. A man who has not been taught by the line of gurus, even if he knows all the scriptures, he has not to be trusted. He cannot be trusted. Why? Because he has tried to understand the scriptures through his mind, which is not pure, which is clouded, and therefore the interpretation that he gives may not be the correct interpretation. That is the difficulty. So Shri Ramakrishna wanted to have every knowledge direct from the mother, to whom he had always easy access. Unfortunately, it is not so with us. But we know that such direct knowledge has to be acquired by some means. If the Divine Mother or the Mother of the Universe is not within our reach, and then we shall at least have the advantage of the incarnations before us. It is through them that we know the true meaning of the scriptures. Now, that is why Swami Vivekananda said, the Vedas and the Vedantas will have to be understood through the interpretation of through the light of Shri Ramakrishna, his life and teachings. These are the ways by means of which we can know the real truth that has to be attained by us. Now, what Shri Ramakrishna specially had to teach us, just let us see from this point of view. Shri Ramakrishna, as we have seen, is a born enlightened soul. Enlightenment is not at a particular point of his life, but it is inborn with him. He is enlightenment itself, as it were. His very essence is that supreme light. But then he has managed to cover up that light so that he can appear to be just like one of us. As Sri Krishna says, that people do not know my ultimate reality, and therefore they consider me as embodied souls, as just like ordinary people, and therefore they look down upon me. They do not know my reality. Sri Ramakrishna also is something which we do not know, and that is why we take him to be either an ordinary priest or a man just trying for God realization, or a man who has realized God, and various other things. Sri Ramakrishna once scolded some of his disciples, saying, you say about me many things. You say I am an incarnation and so forth. And who are the people who say like this? One is a dramatist, another is a doctor and so forth. What do they understand by the word incarnation? Really, we do not understand what incarnation is. We simply talk glibly about these terms, but we do not know what do they mean. An incarnation of God means the divinity which appears as embodied, but containing in it all the light, all the power that the ultimate divinity possesses, in spite of the covering. Now that is what Sri Ramakrishna has to be understood as. This is what Sri Ramakrishna represents. Sri Ramakrishna himself says about him, I am like that unknown tree, Achin Gach. People look at me and see just I am an ordinary being. Sri Ramakrishna just hinted that he did not speak about himself. He said there are some trees which are called as Achin Gach, unknown tree. They have the appearance of a tree, but when we try to see from close quarters, they are very different from the other trees. And that is why people term it as an unknown tree. Similarly, Sri Ramakrishna, when we try to understand him from our point of view, then we fail to gauge his depth, and we say we do not understand. Our criterion becomes too short, too incompetent for gauging him, and therefore we say you do not know what you are. It is just as the Arjuna, when he was given that supreme knowledge, the Vishwarupa, when he saw God in his fullness, then he became frightened and said, I took you to be an ordinary man and behaved with you like our friend and so on, and therefore he must have treated you badly. Please excuse me for that. Now that was the utterance of Arjuna, who was the closest associate of Bhagavan Sri Krishna. In the same way, when we see people who were closely around Sri Ramakrishna, what was their estimation of Sri Ramakrishna? Swami Vivekananda, the greatest exponent of the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, the closest disciple, the foremost of them, he says, I am afraid to speak of Sri Ram, my Guru, because when I try to do that, I may only distort the picture. I am incompetent to gaze it, and therefore I feel afraid. I do not feel sufficiently gifted to elaborate on that point. That is what Swami Vivekananda himself has said. And very rightly it is so, because Sri Ramakrishna, when Swami Vivekananda says like that, what to speak of the other disciples, they all felt that way, that Sri Ramakrishna was so great that their understanding about him, they know this is very incomplete. Now that was Sri Ramakrishna. Now that Sri Ramakrishna, when we see from, say, the narrations of his life, it is so simple, it is so familiar that it is, we feel we are very close towards him. We can just reach him, we can be close to him, we can try to understand him, we can behave with him. But then gradually when we go closer and closer, we understand the distance becomes greater and greater. He becomes too great afterwards to be understood. That is a gradual realization of his greatness. This gradual realization means the vision is gradually being, say, vaster and vaster. Sri Ramakrishna used to speak like this to his intimate disciples. What do you think of me? Naturally, the disciples would feel embarrassed because they have only imperfect idea of Sri Ramakrishna. Why did Sri Ramakrishna ask this question? Did he like to hear something sweet spoken about him? But he was not an egotist like that. He never felt happy with such expressions. Yet he used to put some questions to the disciples with the idea that if they advance spiritually, then they will know more and more about him, clearer picture of his greatness. Otherwise, he will know that they are not progressing in spirituality. That is what is called the progressive realization of the highest truth. Sri Ramakrishna is the embodiment of the highest truth, and those who were around him had been trying to understand him progressively, and then where it ended we do not know. Naturally, we know that one who knows the highest truth, he becomes the highest truth. Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati, he becomes one with that reality. But what Swamiji says, Swami Vivekananda, he says about his brother disciples, do you think he will become one like Sri Ramakrishna? That is never going to happen. Why? Because the more you go towards him, the more you go nearer, you find him further and further. That is what happens in the case of our pursuing the ideal of Sri Ramakrishna. But that does not mean it is eluding our grasp. We know we are progressing, and at the same time we know our realization of Sri Ramakrishna is progressing. That is what is to be understood by the real pursuers of the path of religion. Sri Ramakrishna once said, those who will come here will have the last birth. That means they will ultimately realize the highest goal and will be free from bondage, from the transmigration of births and deaths. Now that is the utterance, a very big utterance. What is the meaning of it? Sometimes we say that whoever came and accepted Sri Ramakrishna as the Guru, they achieved that goal. Perhaps that is only in a limited sense. We can understand that criterion stands even today. Whoever understands him, the ideal that he represents, that he naturally, if he understands, if he accepts that ideal, he is free from birth and death. But then it is a progressive realization, we should know that. It is not that all at once we have understood him and we have just come to the end of our journey. It is a progressive realization. And when we shall go further and further, perhaps we may be closer and closer to him, and perhaps becoming as inscrutable as he himself is. That is the ideal, which remains ever beyond our thought and deed, our words and thought. Now that is what has to be clearly understood. Sri Ramakrishna is not something which we have been able to just completely understand, or we have exhausted all the possibilities of him. Now there are so many facets in it, so many different aspects that we get bewildered when we try to understand them. He not only realized in the systematic way the different aspects of different paths towards God realization, the different prescribed methods. That is, the different methods that are in vogue in Hinduism. Then he followed the Christian method, he followed the Muslim method, and after all these he said that on the bedrock of his experience, personal experience, he says, these are but different paths leading to the same goal. Let us remember that it is not an intellectual generalization. It is the experience that he had through the performance of the various sadhanas, and the sadhanas he performed scrupulously in the way that has been prescribed by the different paths. Now that way he reached the goal and realized that it is the same goal that that the different paths took him to. Now this is the idea that we find a sort of some originality there. Though glimpses of this kind of oneness of experience we find in the scriptures. Ekam sadvipra bahuda vadanti. Or in the Gita also we find the same thing. The Upanishads in various ways they say same thing. But then this kind of practical experience through the different paths of religion that has not been mentioned anywhere in our ancient scriptures. That's a new thing that we find in the life of Shri Ramakrishna. Perhaps it was necessary at this age that this experience had to be demonstrated to the world so that they can know that there is some sort of harmony, some sort of affinity in the different faiths that are apparently contradictory and apparently conflicting. Now this is what is very necessary in modern age when we are finding this clash of interests, clash of faiths and so much of strife and discord raised in the name of religion. Everywhere people say, I follow this religion and therefore those who are not following it must be in the wrong. That is the idea. What Sri Ramakrishna therefore has to say is this, that God can never be exhausted. Ishwarer iti karuna. You never describe him and say that this God can be this and this alone and nothing more. That is a very important item of teaching that Sri Ramakrishna never tired of giving. He was always speaking, emphasizing this point, that you are, now let us understand, we are not aware, not sure of the path that we are following. We are only just trying to follow it and we are just experimenting on it, perhaps just a beginner. And we talk glibly and say, this is the only religion and nothing else. This is the only way to God realization and nothing else. What right have we to speak like that unless we are extremely foolish and completely blind about our, say, the ignorance, about our limitations, and therefore talk like that. Tall talks these are. Now, this Sri Ramakrishna repeatedly taught that you must have faith in your own path, without which you cannot progress, but never limit the range of religion to your path only. It is just a path, that is all. If you have that Catholicity, if you had that breadth of outlook, you can say, well, others also are following the same goal that I am doing. We are following through different paths. If you cannot accept that, at least you can say that I have faith in my path and about others I do not know. That sort of ignorance should be always confessed. Otherwise it will only add more and more discord to already this strife-torn world. Now this has to be carefully remembered. That's a teaching which is very timely also. Now we said Yuga Avatar, or the ideal of the age. This is one of the very important ideals of the age, that we must be humble in our approach and should admit our ignorance and say that I have faith in my path, but about others' paths I do not know. If we are not able to respect them, and when we just have the evidence of Sri Ramakrishna, we can say, well, when Sri Ramakrishna has practiced these paths and then gave that final utterance, then let us accept. If we cannot understand, at least take us on faith that yes, other paths also lead to the goal. Now that is a great solution of the discord that we are seeing everywhere in the name of religion. And when religion becomes a very important factor in our life, naturally it will show its effect through every aspect of every walk of our existence, every aspect of our personality. It will show that was also a teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, that if you are religious, you must show it through your whole being. If you behave in one way and you believe and you profess in another way, that means you are a hypocrite. Now, when we say everything is Brahman, and you make such difference between man and between things of this world, we are only just showing our ignorance. Sri Ramakrishna knew where our ignorance is and knew how to just point at it and just remind us that here you are making a mistake. Sri Ramakrishna saw God everywhere, not merely as a Vedantist, but standing on the bedrock of his experience. One day he was meditating with closed eyes, and then he opened his eyes and said to the devotees that I was trying to meditate with closed eyes, but I did not like it. Because when I God is there when I close my eyes, and when I open them, God is not there. God is there whether I see with open eyes or I close my eyes. God is everywhere. This kind of God realization we must show in all our behavior. When we behave with others, it will show whether we are looking upon the world as manifestations of the divinity or not. Sri Ramakrishna said, you can worship God in a stone image or in a clay image. Can he not be worshipped in a human being? Now how it stands on reason. Man is such a manifestation of the consciousness of the Chaitanya that it is perhaps the best image that you can have of God. Now even that you do not understand, and you just pray before the image of a stone or a timber and so forth. Now that is not decried. Sri Ramakrishna never decried any kind of worship. Even those which are known to be antisocial, even that Sri Ramakrishna could recognize. Only he said, never follow that because it is not a path which is congenial for society. But yet, nevertheless, it is a path. So he believed in all paths, but at the same time, he knew what is good for the world and what is not. So he prescribed only such things as will be conducive for the well-being of the whole world at all times. Sri Ramakrishna never limited the paths of God realization. They are, as Swamiji says, that I shall be happy when every man will have a religion of his own. There are multiplicity of religions, or there are multiplicity of ideals. That does not matter, that need not bewilder us. He says, I shall be happy when every man will have a particular ideal of his own, that is an image of the divinity of his own. We can see God only through our own eyes, and our vision is different. Therefore our God realization also is bound to be different. But that is only from our standpoint. As we proceed higher, as we proceed nearer and nearer the goal, our ideas become clearer and clearer. And ultimately, when we reach the goal, all description cease there. Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa. That is, it cannot be described. Sri Ramakrishna says, Brahman is one thing that has never been made uchishta. That is what has never been described by man. We go further and further, and then when we reach the goal, we stop. That is beautifully, Sri Ramakrishna says, our thought there ceases to be a stream of thinking, a sort of meditation. It merges in the knowledge itself, the all-pervading knowledge itself. That is what has to be remembered. Now Sri Ramakrishna taught in this world, in this age, this thing, that has been already mentioned, and it bears repetition also, that firstly, that God is the be-all and end-all, the foremost thing important in our life. Why? Because without knowing Him, we can never be free from ignorance. We can never be free from these passages through, interminable passages through births and deaths, through the various ills of the flesh. This goes on unless and until we have realized God. So God is the most important thing in life. And then God realization is possible by various methods, various ways. All these ways will have to be accepted as capable of leading us to the goal, and we should have respect for all these paths. Now that is another teaching. The third thing is that our approach to God, as we proceed towards Him, should transform our life in all respects. As Sri Ramakrishna has demonstrated, if we have God realization, we shall have that experience that God is everywhere. And we cannot simply isolate myself from the many and become one who is myself free. My freedom, my liberation is connected with the liberation of others. Swamiji once was asked by Sri Ramakrishna, what is your aim in life? Swamiji said, my aim in life is to remain merged in samadhi. Only occasionally I may come out of it and have a little food and again go deep into samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna laughed and said that I thought you were a worthier person than that. Why don't you feel like that, like a banyan tree which will spread its branches everywhere so that tired pilgrims can come and rest here under the shade? Yeah, that is, you have to be the solace of everybody. Instead of that, you want to remain satisfied with the bliss of samadhi. Sri Ramakrishna never felt that way himself, because once when he was just getting merged into samadhi, he quarreled with the Divine Mother, saying, Mother, don't make me oblivious of the surroundings. I want to speak to the devotees. I don't want to get merged in samadhi. Why? Sri Ramakrishna did not have any kind of vasana, any kind of desire for the earthly things. But then he had that one desire, to be helpful to others, to be able to help others reach the goal, to reach their own salvation, to enable others to free themselves. That was the great desire that Sri Ramakrishna had, which kept him in body. They say body means, say, a sort of desire is necessary to keep one's body, or to keep the soul limited to the body. Now if that desire is inevitable, Sri Ramakrishna had this desire only in this way, that I like to be helpful to others for their self-realization, for their realization of God. He had that idea, and he wanted to, as Swamiji put it, he did not want his liberation unless every soul has been liberated. That is a great utterance of Swamiji, which he learned at the feet of his great master. That is Sri Ramakrishna's teaching. Now Sri Ramakrishna therefore has taught how to behave in this world, what kind of sadhana it should be. Sadhana is not merely in image, though it is worship with an image is helpful. It should not. It should start there, but it should not end there. As in the Bhagavad it is said, "Archayam eva hare pujang yasraddhayate natad bhakteshu channeshu sabhakta prakrita smrita." Who worships in the image and in the image alone, but not elsewhere, he is a beginner. He is yet an unpolished soul. His progress is very limited. As he goes further when he attains the stage, the middle stage, then he realizes the next point that is said in the Bhagavata. Ishvare tad adhineshu balisheshu dvishatsi cha prema maitri kripopeksha yakkarati samadhyama. He is a middle-staged man who realizes Lastly, the highest stage is that Sarvabhuteshu yapashyed bhagavad bhavam atmani bhutani bhagavatyatmanyesha bhagavatottama. He is the supreme Bhagavata, the devotee, who realizes God in every being. Sarvabhuteshu yapashyed bhagavad. The existence of God in all beings and existence of his own self also in all beings. And God residing in all beings and all beings residing in God. That is putting it in either way. Now, he who realizes this kind of knowledge, he is this highest. Now that highest has to be achieved so that we can see God manifested everywhere. That is why Swamiji says, Sarvabhuteshai Premamaya, that supreme God of love is in all beings, and we should, the corollary comes from there, that we should worship him there. As Shri Ramakrishna says, cannot one worship God in a human being? Certainly, he is perhaps the highest image of God. Now that is the teaching that has to be remembered, that we should not be isolationist if we are spiritual. That is the wrong idea of spirituality, remaining shut off in a cell as it were, and then having no connection with the world. No. See God everywhere, that is a higher truth. Perhaps just isolation may be necessary in the beginning for some time, but we should remember that it is only a stage of preparation. When we have reached the goal, then our existence should merge with the Supreme, which is everywhere. That as it is said, Yatha Shuddham Shuddhe Shiktam Tadriyo Bhavati Evam Munir Bijanato Atma Bhavati Gautama. Just as a clear drop of water falls, when it falls into an ocean of clear water, it becomes one with that vast ocean. Now it loses its individuality. In the same manner, when we have God realization of the highest order, then we shall be identified with the entire world, in heart and soul, in every way. That sort of realization, it is not merely a sort of theory, it is not merely a creed, it is the knowledge that has to be attained, that has to be made one's own, that is to be realized. It must be made real to you, and it will show through your behavior. Through your behavior in all respects with everybody. Just as it is said, Swamiji says, our doom was sealed on that day when he made a distinction between the Vyavahara and the Paramartha. That is our world of behavior and the world of the highest truth. If the highest truth is not consistent with our behavior, then it will end in a sort of, cheating ourselves, a sort of remaining cooked, just sealed within the shell of our ideas, and it will never find manifestation in our whole life. That is no realization at all. True realization will mean it will make us one with the entire universe, and our behavior will be shaped accordingly. That is what we find the unique teaching in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. That is why he protested when somebody said, just service or charity towards the world. That is what Jivedaya. We should use the word now charity in a restricted sense, charity towards others. Now Sri Ramakrishna resented to that, protested, and no, who are you to make charity towards others, to show charity towards others? You are to serve God in every being. Now that is what is the great teaching which should be followed by us in the modern age. We should know that nobody will be able to reach goal in isolation. The whole world is waiting to be just enlightened with this truth, that my well-being depends on the well-beings of others. Others' well-being and my well-being should not be separated. It will be the same. My liberation and liberation of the world, this should go together. Now this great teaching has to be remembered as the teaching for the age. When we have followed this, we have solved many of the problems that are besetting the modern society. We know how we are just trying to bring about a compromise and peace and some sort of arrangement by means of which we can live the individuals and nations in peace with one another. But we know also how our efforts are being frustrated, as it were, because whatever we have tried, we know we are far away from the goal. Why? Because we have not tried to just change ourselves in the way that is necessary to have that sort of unity with the entire world. Unity that is not to be merely a teaching of the scriptures, but that should be a way of life for us, rooted on the realization of the highest truth, which is all-pervading. May Sri Ramakrishna help us reach that goal. May his life be a light to us, enlighten us that way, and through our devotion to him, may we have this great realization